residents in Umhlanga and surrounding areas in KZN are demanding answers from the chemical giant UPL about what exactly was stored in a warehouse which was set alight during the violence last month. Toxic smog filled the air for several days, leaving residents with health implications. Imagine breathing this in. It's since been alleged the foreign-owned company housed thousands of deadly chemicals. The claim is they didn't follow a risk assessment. A civil action group has now applied via the Promotion of Access to Information Act for more information from UPL and the KwaZulu-Natal provincial government to try and understand how the chemical storage facility was set up in a shopping and residential suburb. Well, Rico Euripidou is an environmental health campaigner at Groundwork. Rico, good afternoon to you. I mean, what do we know about what was stored in this warehouse? And it can be quite difficult to find out after the fact what was there, unless the company tells you.
Yeah, good afternoon to you and your listeners, Stephen. We as a civil society group are really concerned about this, the limited flow of information that's coming out of UPL, and also in particular the jurisdictional authorities that are on the Joint Operations Committee for this incident. Without good information, we have no idea how to formulate and oversee what a meaningful and complete public health risk assessment looks like, what existing environmental and public health risk.
Seems that Rico Euripidou has been stuck, I'm afraid, in the matrix there. We'll try and sort out that glitch in the matrix and get back to you about that. All right. It's an important story. The United Phosphorus Limited warehouse in Umhlanga. We'll come back to that in a moment. In the meantime, in fact, he's with us now. Rico, I'm afraid we did lose you there. I was asking you the question, how difficult is it to know what was in the warehouse?
Until we have a full disclosed list from UPL as an entity, as a company, we can only speculate about the list. I mean, the list has been leaked and it's been uncovered by the investigative journalist Amabongani. But until we have that list from the company, only then can we be assured that that is the complete list of chemicals. We are particularly concerned about it because there were over 1,600 chemicals that were on that list, and they make up about 5,000 tons in volume. Now, we know that some of those chemicals are highly hazardous. Some of them are banned in other jurisdictions, in the EU, for instance. We know that under the UN frameworks, some of those chemicals are listed as carcinogens. So we need to have good information in order to formulate a good public and environmental health response.
What impact has it had on people in the area?
Well, this is the million-dollar question. So we know that some of those chemicals were chlorinated. We know that there were organics there. We know that there are highly hazardous chemicals. We know that there are mixtures. And we know that there was a fire. And we know that subsequently there was a massive release of chemicals into the receiving environments that resulted in a mass aquatic kind of fish kill and had a big impact on the marine environment. And that was in the acute phase. What we're more worried about is what's going to happen in the chronic phase. So when I say we're worried about chlorinated chemicals in a fire, that is the precursor to what normally happens is these persistent organic chemical mixtures, these man-made construct chemicals get released into the environment. And if that is the case, then we need to put in place long-term public health, environmental surveillance in order that we can track the extent of the plume, the chemical plume and the chemical fallout. We can begin to monitor people that might have been within that footprint, and we can begin to follow them up from a public health perspective so that if any health outcomes arise, we know how to deal with those in those populations.
There's a huge legal fight, as I understand it, around whether the company actually had the right, the permission to store these chemicals in that area. There's a school, I think it's 400 meters away. People shop there, people live there. And I also know, pay a lawyer some money and they'll give you a legal opinion, Rico. Do you believe the company had the right to store these chemicals there?
In Durban, we should have learned from the past lessons from chemical incidents. We had a massive fire at a plastics factory in Durban. We've had numerous explosions from Engen. And still to this day, we don't have a good emergency response plan that kind of predicts in advance who all the role players are and how they should protect themselves and how they should respond to these kinds of incidents. If we don't have the right triggers in place so that we have proper environmental governance and proper environmental oversight, we are going to be faced with this kind of situation over and over again. We just don't seem to be learning from these lessons. So how many other warehouses are out there that store tons and tons of chemicals that through whatever it might be, an accident or an act of God or, you know, a once in a million probability that they get released into the environment? In history, we have big chemical incidents that we should have learned from. The Bhopal disaster in India in the 1980s is one of those, where tens of thousands of people were killed in the acute phase. The other most notable one is from the 1970s in a town called Seveso in Italy. And out of that chemical incident came the Seveso Directive. And that directive is all about disclosing where we store chemicals. Are they safe? Are they inspected regularly? Do we have the right structural measures in place to limit any kind of disaster? And we just don't seem to be learning from those lessons in history.
Well, I mean, the other more recent one, of course, is what happened in Beirut, what people suspect was the largest non-atomic explosion caused by humans. The warehouse full of ammonia that basically exploded there. What this means is that we need more enforcement as well. And I mean, we can argue about the law. It's also about an approach from government. I mean, you could argue as an environmental campaigner perhaps that government has a duty and obligation to keep people safe, and part of that obligation is to conduct regular inspections. Then we'd have a government list of what was in the warehouse. We wouldn't have to try and put pressure on the company.
Exactly. If we had proper oversight for this installation, for this warehouse, and they were properly regulated, there would have been a playbook that governments could have opened in the case of an emergency, and according to that playbook, they would have tailored their emergency response. But what's even more concerning, Stephen, is that the civil society response to this chemical incident has been ignored by government, and we have repeatedly been stonewalled from being on this joint operations committee. Now, you need civil society there as a counterbalance to government, so that we are not fearful of making big decisions or of putting things on the table. We are not self-limited. By having only the company and government and experts that have been appointed by the company, it's almost as if you are self-limiting your response to the incident. You have to have civil society there. You have to have people from the affected community there. You have to have some kind of representation that counterbalances any kind of self-limiting structural factor that government might have in place. I mean, UPL at the moment, rightly so, are probably very fearful of any litigation and don't want to disclose too much information that gives more fuel for litigation. But for us, we have to have a long-term view. You know, if we're going to have to remediate the site for the next 10, 15 years, who's going to pay for that? Where is the fund in place at the moment in order for us to put in place those measures that might be necessary?
Rico Euripidou, thank you very much indeed. Environmental health campaigner at Groundwork. I do appreciate the time. It's an amazing story. There are a lot of lessons for us to learn as a society about what happened with the UPL warehouse after the violence in KZN. Well, coming up.